Hello, I'm Frank Epstein, founder and president of Collage New Music. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our latest online presentation entitled The Composer Speaks. The Composer Speaks is an opportunity to introduce composers directly to you. Our guest today is Joan Tower, a Grammy Award-winning composer and longtime friend of Collage. Joan is recognized as one of America's important musical voices. A performer herself, Joan brings character and intuition to her music, which is the basis for her success as a composer. Joan has a winning personality, fun-loving, with a marvelous sense of humor, all supported by a strong work ethic and a history of creating many successful compositions. In this two-part video, Joan will be interviewed by music director David Hoose. We thank you all for joining us, and we hope this experience will bring you closer to new music and the composers who write it.
Good morning, Joan.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for talking with me today. Really appreciate it. You are a very busy person, if for all manner of reasons. But you are busiest, I assume, because you are spending much of your day composing, which we hope is the case. But you said in some interview that I read that you found composing a real challenge. All your life it's been a challenge. And I'm wondering first whether this time of isolation that we're experiencing with COVID-19, whether it's made it more difficult or maybe it's afforded you more time and more room to concentrate. I'm wondering if you might fill us in a little bit on how your life is going now.
That's a very interesting question, actually, because what happened, I'm running a cello concerto now, and there was a deadline. Now the deadline has since gone away, but the first three movements came really fast. It's four movements. And I said, wow, you never wrote this fast before in your entire life. I'm like a turtle. I go 1 centimeter per hour. I mean, I write 2 minutes a month kind of thing. Very slow, very slow. And this just came out. I said, what is going on here? And I think it's because I had more time and I was at home and there were less distractions. And just I had a lot more time to, I guess, breathe or relax or something. I don't know what happened.
I mean, some people are report that, and certainly I report that there are periods when I can't concentrate as well as I used to. And then there are other periods that seem quite focused and it seems quite unpredictable. I'm glad to hear that the first three movements have gone smoothly and quickly. How about the fourth movement, though?
I'm having trouble. I ran into a block wall. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was that operation I had yesterday. I don't know.
Well, you maybe can't judge on the basis of 24 hours. Do you have a specific period of the day during which you compose, or do you compose scattered through the day whenever the inspiration comes?
I have a very definite schedule. It's usually between 1 and 5. And I tell my friends and my students, please don't call me. Then they now respect that. If they don't call me, usually if they call, they say, oh my God, I'm sorry, I forgot it's your composing time. So it's like a job, like a schedule. I got to get there. If I'm shopping, I'll come rushing home, to get there on time. Yeah, because it's important. That time slot is very important to maintain on a kind of religious schedule.
Have you experimented and tried composing in the morning or at night,
No.
or it just doesn't work?
This has always been the same, because in the morning I exercise in the morning and I do emails and all that, And at night I watch a foreign film or something.
So, in other words, even if at 5:30 you're going like the wind, you'll stop.
Yeah, I think I will, because going like the wind, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, like the breeze.
I might add a few minutes, but
Yeah.
I'm very scheduled, to tell you.
So, do you ever get stuck? I mean, it sounds like you think you are a little bit held up in the fourth movement of this concerto, but do you ever really get stuck and just don't know what to do, what the next move in the piece is?
Oh, always, always. It's like, for me, it has to be motivated naturally, and it takes a lot of years to get your perceptions straight. Like I tell my students, you have three reactions to what you do. One is, I don't like this. On Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Second is, I like this Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The third is, I like it on Monday, I don't like it on Tuesday, I like it on Wednesday. So there are three types of reactions you have. And you have to be very in tune with those, because that's all you've got. You've got you and your music and your instincts for decision making.
Yeah.
Of I like this on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You have to give it time, because it might change the next day.
So when you do get stuck, how do you get out of the hole?
I wait.
You wait.
I'm very patient.
Yeah. And so some of those 4 hours that you spend in the afternoon may be spent staring at the manuscript paper.
Well, sometimes I go do something else and come back, and it breaks it a little bit. I think I can't, if you just sit there for 20 minutes and nothing happens, I think you need to just take a break. You know?
Yeah.
I play the piano or I draw. I draw.
When you're trying to work through a problem in the piece, do you think that the blocks are ones of inspiration, or just can't figure out what the material needs to do next, or something else?
See, I think of music as having a narrative that is motivated by the stuff before it. In other words, it's like reading a good novel that you can follow, that has a profile of characters, that has a strong tension in the narrative. So if I don't get that going, I'm stuck. But it usually has something to do with the material that's already been there. It's not working quite right. So I have to change that.
Yeah. So you're backing up quite a lot and changing things, I assume.
Oh yeah, all the time. And I always start from the beginning, always, because to me, every music is from the beginning. In other words, it's a left to right phenomena, and it has a timeline. So I always go back to the beginning, no matter how much I know about it, no matter how tedious that might be. And it's sort of like trying to keep the excitement going over a long period of time, meaning my time, meaning that I can go back to the beginning and still be interested in it.
Mm-hmm. So when you start a new piece, how much of the large picture do you have in mind? Or do you have a kernel of an idea that then begins to blossom like a flower of some sort?
It's the latter, because I don't trust the conceptual thinking. I never have my own. I know that some people can do that very well, but I can't, because the logic to me of the concept is not always working with a musical logic. It might be a logic, but it's not necessarily a musical logic. So, I want the musical logic to be there unfolding naturally.
Well, we think of most concertos as being in statistically 3 movements. So how did your cello concerto, which we'll look forward to hearing, how did it come to be in 4 movements? Was that an early decision?
I don't do movements. I only have one piece in my entire repertoire that is in movements. So this was an interesting new approach for me to parcel out things in movements. And I'm not sure why I did that exactly. I don't know why I chose that, but it's definitely in 4 movements, no question about it.
So how you said that sometimes when you're at an impasse of some sort, in addition to drawing or maybe getting a cup of tea, you go play the piano. And you, of course, began your life as a pianist and a fantastic pianist, founder of Da Capo Players. And when you're playing the piano today, what music are you playing?
Well, during this COVID period, I went back to my roots, and I'm memorizing a piano program of dead composers, of my favorite.
There are a lot of those.
I know, there are a lot. My favorite dead composers: Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy, and I'm throwing in a jazz piece.
Tell us about the jazz piece.
Oh, it's called Dancing in the Dark. No, sorry. So wait. Sorry. Yes. It's called Dancing in the Dark. It's an arrangement by Carmen Caballero, because I don't improvise, but I was married to a jazz pianist for 10 years, and I got to hear all the jazz greats live in New York. And there's a lot of jazz kind of harmonies in my music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't hear my music as jazz, but the harmonies are in there.
You told a funny story that I read, that when you were playing with Da Capo, your colleagues increasingly wanted to play big, fancy, difficult, Elliott Carter and whatever else works, and that you wanted to play smaller and smaller pieces, and that they began to tease you, saying, "Oh, Joan, she just wants to play whole notes." So it sounds like this program you're preparing is anything but whole notes.
That's true. That's true. Well, they got better and better, and their chops got faster and faster. Mine got slower and slower because I was getting more composition going and more activity in that. So it got to be a joke. We can't play this piece because it has 16th notes in it. And then I had to leave, which was like leaving my family. Yeah, it was hard.
So how did you even become a pianist? Did you come from a musical family?
Well, yes, my grandmother was a pianist, and my father was, even though he was a mining engineer, his mother, he was very musical. My father was extremely musical. So he supported me from day one, from the pianist. I started as a pianist, and he was right there. We traveled a lot. But he found a teacher and a piano for me wherever we went, which was very generous of him, actually, to do. So I had a lot of support there. And we had musicals after dinner. We would gather around the piano. My mother played the piano, too. And my father sang kind of badly.
Oh, yeah.
And he played the violin badly. And he played, but he tried. Yeah. And my mother played the piano, and then I replaced my mother because I got better and better and better. Mm-hmm. And those were wonderful moments. We did old songs from the 20s and 30s.
So I think you wrote your first composition when you were in college. Is that right?
That's right.
Do you have any memory of that piece?
Oh, yeah. It was my first piece, and it was terrible. It was a total disaster. And I remember hearing it, and I was so embarrassed. I said, oh, I know I can do better. I know I can do better. And I just kept trying to do better. And I did better, and I've been trying ever since. But
well, that's quite a testimony to perseverance. I mean, some people might write her first piece and it would be terrible, and they say, well, this is not for me. I'm out of here.
oh, no, I am persistent. I'm definitely persistent. But also, I'm very curious about all things musical. So this was a different way into music that was so fascinating to me, because you had to create the page. You had to, which was very different from following the page as a pianist. I was so curious about this whole activity and also later on, I was curious about conducting. Because I was working with a lot of conductors, and there was something going on that I never understood between the conductor and the orchestra. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take up conducting because I want to know what that's about.
So, in fact, you've been extremely fortunate, and we've been extremely fortunate that your music has been played so widely and by a large number of ensembles, major orchestras. A handful of years ago, you composed a work called Made in America for 65 regional and avocational orchestras. You mentioned just a minute ago about the differences between, say, the Chicago Symphony and the St. Louis Symphony, but I can only imagine what the differences might have been between this community orchestra or this regional orchestra. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you as you, I presume, heard many of those performances.
It was an amazing experience, and I couldn't believe that I was chosen for that project. It just got to be 65 orchestras, which was an immense amount of orchestras, and they did range, as you said, from totally amateur to totally professional. And the first guy, who was the most amateur guy, contacted me immediately, and he said, look, I'm not sure my orchestra can play this piece, so I want you to send it to me 8 months in advance or something like that. And I was like, 8 months? Well,
I haven't started to write it yet.
I said, but you know what? I'm going to use you as my guinea pig, because you got to me quickly and because you told me your players are very slow. So I was constantly in touch with him. And it was great that I was. And I also went to my professional players, and I checked out every part for community orchestra type. And they saved me. They said, okay, that's too high for the whole section. You just give it to the first violin. That's too fast for the brass players. And they just really nailed it, helped me so much. Mm-hmm. It was a good choice to do that. And then the idea of going to all these community orchestras, I couldn't go to all of them because they triple booked them. Mm-hmm. So they were on the same day sometimes. I went to 20, and I conducted 8 of them. And they treated me, the first amateur group that was the lowest, it really was made up of this ragtag group of people from, I don't know, the farm. I don't know where they were from, but this guy was like he was like a football coach, you know. Mm-hmm. Okay, we can do better than this. Come on, guys, you know, he was like that. and he flagged them for 6 months. I did get it to him early, piece by piece, and I got there to this town, and I was treated like this rock star had come.
Which
like
you are.
Well, I was Madonna or something. I was picked up at the airport, I think, in a limousine or something. I walked in the hall, and the orchestra stood up and yelled and congratulated me. That never happened in the professional world ever.
Right.
No, they don't even know you're there. Yeah, it's like, oh God, she's here. You know,
She might have something to say.
that's right. And I was like so blown away. And then they played this piece for me, and I was like so touched by the passion and the energy. They were pulling their weight. They had all progressed, like big time in their technique to get this piece right. It was so heartwarming. And that happened over and over again. And these community orchestras, you find some really dedicated community orchestras in the smallest little towns in Texas, Idaho, all over the place. And the community is so devoted to that orchestra because the players, for one thing, view that orchestra as their home team, and they love going to rehearsals because it's so much more fun than the day job they have, which is usually kind of boring, a clerk in a bank or something, I don't know. And the energy is just so different, and it was really interesting. I got this one professional orchestra, was higher level. It was still defined as a community orchestra. I got there, they hadn't learned the music. The conductor sort of knew it, but not that well. And they were like bummed out that they had to do this new piece kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and they played it better because they were better players. But it was like cardboard. They were just like doing a job, So I didn't care about that performance at all. I cared about the first one, which is really because they put their energy into it. They really cared about what they were doing.
I want to go back for a second, if we can, to your days of public professional piano playing, especially in da capo players, and just wondering if you have any idea at this point how playing the piano in that chamber group has affected your composing, partly because you're having to deal with a lot of compositional voices, all kinds of music, but also just the act of playing together with other fine musicians.
Well, that's a very nice question, because that was my education. That became my education, not my PhD that I got from Columbia. That was not my education, because that was very different, books and all that, hanging out in the library a lot, which bored me to tears. I wasn't into library hanging out at all. I was into making music. And so starting that group was the best idea I ever had, because I learned how to play with others. I learned how to think how they think. I learned how to see how composers come in. We dealt with a lot of composers would come in and talk to us, how they would help us or wouldn't help us. It was such a and I got to know a lot of composers, a lot of contemporary composers that way, and their music, some of whom spoke to me very fast, and some I didn't understand at all. So being on the other side of the fence as a composer was a huge education for me. Huge.
Were there kinds of comments that composers would make that were particularly helpful to you all, or particularly unhelpful to you all? Are there categories that you can put those kinds of comments in?
Yeah, there'd be a composer. Some composers would come in and talk about the meaning of something, and we would sit there like, this is interesting, but it's not helping us play this piece.
Right.
It's interesting to listen to you, but it's not helping us at all. And then there were other people who come in right away, would help us. I think if you could use less pedal and measure 64, or could we have a little more staccato in the flute and measure 110 or something like that? Or could that be more expressive? A language that would really help us. That was great. And they went from A to Z that way.
Yeah. So that, in fact, it sounds like the kinds of comments that were, at least initially, most helpful were the ones that address technical issues. You know, less pedal, more staccato, as opposed to the large philosophical, emotional language that...
Well, see, I think, if somebody says to you, as could that sound more like clouds in the sky? If it actually sounds like clouds in the sky, yes, that could be helpful. But see, often that kind of distance of language is not in the music.
Mm-hmm.
If it's right there in the music, yes. If it isn't, it doesn't help at all.
So you're probably prompted to say, well, if you had written clouds in the sky, perhaps we could make them sound like clouds in the sky.
Yeah, well, that's kind of rude thing to
Oh,
say.
I'm not suggesting you would. Certainly, you wouldn't have said that.
But
I wasn't imagining that you would have, but
see, in the middle of this dialogue, which could be anything, is the music. Now, the music is controlling what is understood by the players. Now, so some pieces, it took me a long time to figure this out. Some pieces we'd start to rehearse and somebody would say immediately, "Oh, you know what? I really have to go get a cup of coffee because I'm half asleep." And the next player would say, "Yeah, and I have to make a phone call. So can we just delay this a little bit?" "Yeah, sure, no problem." Other pieces, we'd sit down and it was immediate action. "No, you're too fast there. Those 16 notes have to be steady because I can't follow you." And we would be into the piece right away. No phone calls, no coffee, nothing. And it took me years to figure out that it was the music that was controlling that behavior.
You probably saw similar, the same composers' names over the years.
Yes.
This piece by, Joan Tower, and now this piece by Joan Tower, and now this piece by Joan Tower. Did it become predictable as to whether you'd be wanting to go out for coffee or wanting to just dig in and work right away?
I think it was still the piece that was controlling the work. I really believe that. The music has a lot of power in spite of what the relationship is between the players and the composer, and whether the composer can talk to you at all. It's still the music that's controlling things, basically.
now you.
I'd just like to say, can I say one more thing about that?
Please.
The composers who were players or are players were easier to deal with because they understood your point of view.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so they also understand human foibles in a way that composers who are very much in their head and aren't performers seem not to sometimes.
That's right. Well, the empathy, the experience is not there, so the empathy is not there. Also, they take the position that they are the authorities. And that becomes a complex issue. Are you the authority here just because you wrote everything down or not? And the players take the attitude that you're the authority too. When in fact the music could be flexible, like maybe that shouldn't be staccato, maybe that should be on the string. Mm-hmm. And some player says, "I really think this would be better on the string." That's taking a position against the notation. And if the composer hears that as better and acknowledges it as better, will say, "Yes, absolutely. Play it that way. That's much better." Whereas the composer who thinks they're the authority will say, "Oh no, I want the dots."
Well, it's one of the puzzling things about notated music is that there's nothing else like it. To me, painting is not like it. Writing a play, it's not like it. You have your lines in your Shakespeare play, and the number of ways that those lines can be said, the speed with which they can be said, are truly infinite. And yes, the ways you can play that phrase in that Beethoven sonata or that Joan Tower piece, they're also infinite, but they are much more circumscribed by the bounds of the notation. And yes, there's a dot over those notes, meaning staccato, short, but there are myriad ways of playing staccato and of the quality of the attack and the release and everything like that. But everything's working in a fairly narrow span. Every event has to happen in the right order, more or less at the right time. I would say more at the right time than not. And the choices that performers are making are very finely tuned ones. It's not to say acting is not finely tuned, but it's not prescribed by the playwright. So I think what you're saying is that the group, the ensemble, starts with the presumption that that piece of paper is the authority. And then how much room do you have to move?
Exactly. Thank you for saying that. You're the first person I've ever talked to that made that connection with the theater. I use that all the time because the script is, Henry says, I love you. And so how many ways can you say I love you? I mean, lots of ways, right? I love you.
Yeah.
Or I love you, and there's it's infinite, the possibilities of interpretation of just those three words, right?
Yep.
But in music, it's at a certain speed. I love, and then it goes up or down, and it has a dynamic, and it has a register, and it has everything. So all you have to do is just read it, and you'll get it mostly, right? Yeah. So the pros of that are that piece of paper and that music can go to Europe, and it can go to Russia, and it can go to wherever and be played. It can be played. They don't need you. They don't need anybody. They just give me the music and I'll play this music. And it puts the players in a much more passive situation.
But it seems to me that it is a very creative, playing or singing is a very creative process. It's just that it's the level of creativity or the focus of the creativity is at a very finely tuned level. The dotted quarter, the eighth, the triplet, the E flat, the forte, they're fairly well defined. Some of them very defined. Forte, maybe not so defined. But to think that the classical musician, the violinist, is merely an automaton, I think is a misnomer. I don't think you're saying that. It's just that the ways in which the performer is creative is sometimes invisible to, or not necessarily definable by the listener.
That's true. And I think when you're in chamber music, like string quartets, for example, which I think are really creative people, they have to be, because it's a very large and competitive world, and they have to be top-notch players. But as a group, they have to be very unique and creative. So when you walk into them as a composer and you say something like, do you think dots are better or no dots? And they immediately go into action. Okay, no, actually, and they may even have an argument amongst them, like, well, dots are much better here with this context, blah, blah. And so you're actually talking to four composers when you're talking to a string quartet, because they're used to that kind of creative action in rehearsals. And the other thing is they have very powerful music to play. So they're already on a high level because the music is so engaging. The Beethoven quartets, the Schubert quartet. I mean, there's just an immensely powerful repertoire there to begin with. But they have to bring it to another level to make their voice heard as a group, right? But in the orchestra world, I think it's harder because you can't say to the conductor, "Excuse me, I think there should be no dots there." You can't say that. I mean, you have very little input because there's no time. There's no time.
Joan Tower's Breakfast Rhythms is probably the first piece of hers that I ever heard. And I was struck by its vitality and its freshness. And now, years later, I finally had the opportunity to perform it with Collage New Music. And it is just as fresh today as it was those many years ago.